Hello and welcome to Daily Interlake News Now. I'm your host, Taylor Inman. We're taking a look at some of last week's biggest headlines and what's coming up for the Flathead Valley. In this week's Deep Dive segment, I chat with Interlake News editor Derek Perkins, who earlier this month covered the Kalispell Fitness Center shooting trial. He gives us a look into how he covers lengthy murder trials like this one and other insights into covering the legal system. But first, here are some headlines. Montana is likely to see a rapid increase in wildfires as the summer grows hotter and the rain stops. Governor Greg Gianforte hosted a fire briefing Tuesday morning in Helena to address the upcoming anticipated peak in fire season in the state. And while residents can't control the weather, they can help mitigate the risk of severe wildfires. Gianforte said this before reiterating his administration's policy of quickly dousing wildfires. Montana has seen 705 wildfires, which together have burned a total of over 1,200 acres this year, according to Matt Hall, a Fire Protection Bureau chief at the State Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. Of those, 87% were caused by humans. Due to extreme heat, early snowmelt, and the ongoing drought, meteorologists expect an increase in the number and intensity of wildfires from this point forward. The drought that took hold in northwest Montana last summer has intensified, according to Dan Borsum, a fire weather meteorologist for the Northern Rockies geographic area. Borsum pointed towards extreme dryness across the state, specifically in Flathead, Lincoln, and Glacier counties. Satellite groundwater detection indicated that western Montana is currently drier than 97% of all other years. Borsum said there are multiple factors contributing to this. The winter snowpack was below normal in northwest Montana, and paired with the fourth warmest May in Montana's history, the snowpack depleted early on. Borsum said these deficits will worsen in the coming weeks, especially as chances for rain diminish and strong heat waves hit the state, bringing a profound drying to the landscape. Given the prospect of an intense wildfire season, Hall stressed the importance of preparation. Homeowners should create and maintain a buffer around the home where fuels are limited, and people also need to prepare evacuation plans. Gianforte urged the public to be responsible outdoors on multiple occasions during the briefing, pointing to the fact that nearly 90% of all wildfires this year were caused by humans. A bat that had human contact tested positive for rabies last week, according to the Flathead City County Health Department. It's the first animal that has tested positive for rabies in Flathead County this year. The health department said in a release on Monday that not all bats carry rabies, but after contact with a human or animal, it must be tested. Any contact with a bat must be reported to the health department, where personnel will assess the situation and cover the cost of rabies testing if deemed necessary. If a bat is not available for testing and an animal or person has been bitten, scratched, or been in direct contact, it is considered rabies exposure, and the appropriate follow-up, including post-exposure prophylaxis for humans, must be completed. Health officials note that bats are of a special concern because a bite may not be noticeable. If a bat is found in an area where contact may have occurred but gone unnoticed, such as a bedroom with a sleeping child or adult, it should be tested for rabies. Health department officials advise against feeding or handling wild animals, especially bats. They also recommend vaccinating your pets against rabies because cats in particular are susceptible to exposure due to high risk of interaction with wild animals. All dogs and cats are required to have a current rabies certificate in Flathead County. Contact the health department's communicable disease line at 406-751-8117 to report if a bat has had human or animal contact and to get guidance on proper procedure. Boating opportunities are now available on St. Mary and Two Medicine Lakes on the east side of Glacier National Park. Park officials said it's the first time since 2019 that boating has been available on these lakes. The Blackfeet tribe in Glacier National Park has entered into a contractual agreement for the Aquatic Invasive Species stations to be operated by tribal inspectors. Motorized boat inspections from Montana State, Whitefish Lake, Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, the Blackfeet tribe, and Waterton Lakes National Park are accepted, but a 30-day quarantine of motorized boats before use in park waters continues to be required. Non-motorized watercraft must obtain an inspection upon each entry into the park. Park officials attribute the boating closure on the lakes to COVID-19 and lingering staffing challenges. In 2021 and 2022, the park attempted to operate the stations but were unsuccessful in recruiting enough staff to work all locations. Discussions began with the Blackfeet tribe in 2022 to negotiate the use of tribal inspectors. This will be the first season motorized boating will be allowed on St. Mary Lake since mussels were detected in Montana in 2016. St. Mary, Two Medicine, and Lake McDonald are the only lakes in Glacier National Park that allow motorized boating, except for Bowman Lake that allows less than 10 horsepower, non-water-cooled motors. The St. Mary and Two Medicine Aquatic Invasive Species stations will operate from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. 7 days a week. The St. Mary station will be located at the St. Mary Visitor Center, and the Two Medicine station is located prior to the park entrance. For our deep dive segment, I'm chatting with news editor Derek Perkins, who earlier this month covered the trial of 37-year-old Jonathan Shaw, who was found guilty of deliberate homicide in the 2021 shooting death of a gym employee outside Fuel Fitness in Kalispell. The verdict followed a 4-day trial in Flathead County District Court, where the 12-person panel also found Shaw guilty of attempted deliberate homicide for shooting and wounding a gym patron who engaged him in a gun battle in the parking lot. Prosecutors allege that Shaw shot Fuel Fitness manager Matthew Hurley dead after Hurley tried to refund his gym membership and dislodge him from the parking lot, where Shaw was living in a trailer. Matt Underhill, the gym's assistant manager, had accompanied Hurley into the parking lot and testified earlier in the week that a menacing Shaw followed them back towards the gym before declaring his intent to kill and opening fire. Another gym patron, William Keck, engaged Shaw in a gunfight shortly after Underhill fled. Both men were wounded in the exchange, which led to the attempted deliberate homicide charge. Jurors began deliberating just after 3 p.m. on July 13th and returned to Judge Dan Wilson, who presided over the case, with a verdict at about 7:41 p.m. Wilson set sentencing for September 21st. Derek is our news editor here at the Interlake. He covers crime in courts. Earlier this month, he was in Flathead County District Court covering the end of the Fuel Fitness Center shooting trial. I wanted to go over a few aspects of that trial and take a peek into how you cover stuff like this. So this case against Jonathan Shaw took 2 years to go to trial. Why did it take so long, and why in general does it take a while for cases like these to go to trial?
Sure. There can be a lot of reasons why someone gets charged, then 2 or 3 years might pass before they go to trial. General rule of thumb, it seems like the more serious cases take longer to go to trial. That would be your murders or your rapes. That's not consistent or across the board, but generally. But even for some of the smaller crimes we cover, and I use smaller loosely, assaults or thefts or burglaries, they can take a long time. Someone might skip bail. There could be a change in attorneys. They might be running things through the crime lab. There can be a lot of hearings that lead up to the court case, or the court trial, rather. Those sorts of things tend to delay it. The big concern usually I've seen on the judge's side of things is to make sure that the defendant knows that they have a right to a speedy trial, and if they're okay with waiving that for whatever reason, then it can be continued, which is not to say it's continued indefinitely, but you can see cases drag out that way. With Shaw in particular, as I recall, and I came into this case a little bit midstream. I think the shooting happened when I was still up in Libby. I came down last spring, and my first interaction with the proceedings in the courthouse were, as I recall, regarding mental health evaluations on the defendant. I think there was also a change in attorney somewhere in there. So those sorts of things can push off a case quite far.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of information coming your way when you cover trials like these. And we also have to be sensitive when covering it, right? So what do you keep in mind when you are watching these cases unfold in court?
Sure. Well, the first part, and this is something I think is very hard for folks to not understand, but they don't necessarily know it. When a crime or an alleged crime happens, there is what is generally referred to as charging documents that are filed by the county attorney's office. And those are they usually happen within a few days of the crime, not always, but usually. They're written off of the police reports and early evidence gathered, and they're very one-sided. This is the county attorney's office saying, this thing happened, this crime was committed, and we believe that this person did it, and here are some of the reasons why. So when the charging documents end up in the courthouse, they usually lay out the basic facts of the case. A crime has been committed or allegedly committed. Someone is under suspicion of committing that crime. Here are the reasons for why the county attorney's office thinks they've committed that crime. And again, it's very one-sided. The defendant has no say in it. If you, Taylor, were charged with a crime tomorrow, the document I would see in the next day or two would just be all the reasons why we think you committed that, or the state thinks you committed that crime. So that is typically our first story when a crime breaks, is written off of those charging documents. The defendant's side of the story won't really come out until the trial, sometimes earlier if they file motions to see it dismissed, or evidentiary motions to get things tossed out, or kept from coming up during the court proceedings. So that's where it starts. And from there, you have an omnibus hearing, which is just sort of a conference or deadline that the judges have with the attorneys. Usually the defendant does not appear for these things. And then a few weeks to a few months afterwards is a pretrial conference. And then there'll usually be a status hearing in a short window after that, and then it would go to trial. So all in all, it's usually a 6 to 9 month process is what I've seen.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was a great rundown for me, too. It's really hard to keep track of all of that. So there was a lot of discussion in the trial about a gunfight that happened immediately after the shooting of Matthew Hurley. Why did this incident play such a big role in the trial?
So the defendant, Jonathan Shaw, was charged with 2 separate counts. One was deliberate homicide, one was attempted deliberate homicide. The deliberate homicide charge was linked to the shooting death of Matthew Hurley. Attempted deliberate homicide was in regards to the gym patron who came out and engaged Jonathan Shaw in a gun battle in the parking lot. The reason that took a lot of focus it sort of depends on which perspective you were looking at it through. In the defense's telling, and they took an affirmative defense, which means that they acknowledged that Jonathan Shaw handled the gun throughout, that he shot Matthew Hurley, that he shot at this other gym patron. In fact, he shot this other gym patron as well. So their argument was Jonathan Shaw was taken by surprise by a couple of gym employees. He thought that they took on a threatening manner, and then when they reached into their pockets for cell phones, or at least one reached into a pocket for a cell phone, he assumed that they were pulling out guns, and that's why he opened fire. So in an affirmative defense, he was arguing that he was justified in using force in that situation. He felt threatened. He felt like he was going to be shot. So, of course, he acted in self-defense. If you look at it through that lens, then the follow-on shooting with the gym patron is just more self-defense. So there was a lot of conversation and back and forth on that. And one of the points that his defense attorneys was trying to establish was that the other gym patron fired first. And that would, in my mind, as someone who viewed the case, would just buttress that argument of, here's Jonathan Shaw, who is now a convicted murderer, but in their view of things, he has just been threatened. He thought he was going to die in a parking lot. He pulled a gun in self-defense. He has, in fear and fright, retreated back to his truck, and then somebody else comes out shooting at him. So there was a lot of conversation around that. I believe in day 3 of the trial, it might have been a different day, honestly, his attorneys attempted to see that second charge dismissed, saying that the state had not established the grounds for it, which did not happen, but that was an angle they were working for sure.
So, when you're in court and you're hearing both sides of this case and you go to write a story, how do you, as a reporter, balance those narratives to write the article, to inform the public about it?
It can be difficult. There are a number of reasons why. My guiding star throughout is that the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. It may look surface level, very clear one way or the other, but that person has that, right, that we would assume that of them until a jury comes back with a verdict. I may disagree with some of the evidence I see. I might dismiss it just as a person watching this, but that's not my place to say. And so what I end up focusing on is, what are the attorneys trying to do? And for me, that's really the fascinating part of this, is what arguments are they making? What evidence are they linking to? And what's the case that they're trying to build? With this case, as I said, the defense attorneys for Jonathan Shaw were trying to present this series of events as a man who was confronted by 2 men he did not know, and acted in self-defense. If you look at it through the prosecution side, the county attorney's side, you've got a man who was living, I don't know if illegally is the right word, but certainly not with permission of the gym in their parking lot, who was then being told he needs to leave and being refunded his membership, who then acted out of revenge or spite to kill the people who were trying to force him away from his home.
So you've covered this stuff for many years. What are your main priorities when you have to cover a shooting or an act of violence like this, particularly if the trial hasn't happened yet?
to refer back to what I said a little bit earlier, right, is that the defendant is always innocent until proven guilty. And that, as I said earlier, doesn't necessarily always come across, because early in the process, we are really working with the documents that the county attorney's office has put out there. Until maybe a motion to dismiss pops up or something along those lines, it's really not easy to get a sense for what the defense attorneys are thinking or what the defendant's saying. And if they speak to us, they could, not necessarily, they could harm their own defense proceedings. So, it's kind of a tough spot. So you got to remember that the person who has been accused of this crime may not have actually done it, may very well be innocent. And that can be a difficult thing to remember, but you do have to keep it forefront. The other thing is to remember how little you know about anything. If you take something like the Jonathan Shaw shooting, or the Fuel Fitness shooting, rather, there was it seemed to someone stepping into it midstream. As I said, it was up in Libya when it happened. It seemed fairly open and shut and straightforward. I think something that was very interesting to me throughout the trial was we heard from several people who were there, including the gym employee who accompanied Matt Hurley out to the parking lot. We heard from the gym patron who shot at Jonathan Shaw. We heard at somebody else who was in their truck in that parking lot. And we heard from Jonathan Shaw himself. They all had very different accounts. The thing to remember is there's so much we don't know. If you're not there, if the police are not there, if there's no surveillance footage, you just got to remind yourself that, you just don't know what happened, and you're trusting other people to give you accurate information, and you need to attribute that information to those folks.
Yeah. All right. Well, Derek, thank you for your coverage. And you can read more about this trial on our website, dailyinterlake.com. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks for having me on.
Now it's time to take a look at what events are coming up this week. Remember, you can find karaoke nights, art classes, live music, and anything community related by going to dailyinterlake.com/events and exploring our events calendar. And for business owners out there, it's totally free to sign up and start posting your events for the entire region to see. The Walcholtz College Center is pleased to present Marty Stuart and his fabulous superlatives on July 28th at 8 p.m. A Country Music Hall of Famer, 5-time Grammy Award winner, and AMA Lifetime Achievement honoree, Stuart knows a thing or two about standing the test of time. Over the course of 40-plus years as a solo artist, he would go on to release more than 20 major label albums, scoring platinum sales, hit singles, and more. Tickets are in limited supply and can be purchased through the Walcholtz College Center website. Join for a night of Broadway showstoppers as the Alpine Theater Project presents the faculty of its Broadway summer camp. A night of Broadway tunes featuring 10 Broadway veterans. Tickets are $49 and the show will start at 8 p.m. on July 30th at the Whitefish Performing Arts Center. And the Brash Rodeo at the Blue Moon Arena in Columbia Falls is taking place on July 28th at 7 p.m. Part of Columbia Falls Heritage Days, it's Montana's longest-running series open rodeo. Tickets are $15, and more information can be found by contacting the Blue Moon. Find details for these events and more at dailyinterlake.com/events. Thanks for joining us. News Now is a podcast from the Daily Interlake. We're proud to be the largest independent newsroom in Montana and the oldest paper in the Valley. Consider becoming a subscriber to support our work. Call Circulation at 406-755-7018 or go to the subscribe tab in the top right corner of our website. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode of the pod. Everybody stay safe and have a great week.